is Monday night. It is a time when we pause to look at deep and very sometimes heart-wrenching matters. Tonight we're looking at matters of state and we're looking at global affairs. So much has been happening in the world recently, and tonight we're going to be dissecting some of those issues. We've heard about the war in Ukraine and we're looking at people trying to flee the country, but outside of that it has global implications. We have a team of panelists tonight who will help us analyze some of the issues, looking at the war in Ukraine and how it could impact Caribbean economies. Already we heard from our Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Mitchell, in an address to the nation last Thursday that there could be some economic fallout. We had some coverage of that in the news. And tonight, let's introduce our panelists. We have with us this evening a distinguished panel, I dare say. We have the Permanent Secretary in Grenada's Ministry of Finance, Mr. Mike Sylvester. I like to put honorable in front of his name. Mr. Sylvester is PS and he spent 3.5 years at the International Monetary Fund. Mr. Sylvester, it's so great to have you with us this evening. Good evening.
Good evening to the listening and viewing public, and also thank you for having me on the program.
Great. We have Ambassador Lionel Hurst. He's Antigua and Barbuda's former ambassador to the United Nations, the OAS, and the United States, and he now serves as the Chief of Staff in the Prime Minister's office, Antigua and Barbuda. Ambassador Hurst, it's so great to have you with us this evening.
I'm delighted to be with you. Thank you very much for the invitation, and look forward to joining my colleagues here on the panel.
Great. And we now cross to the African continent, and I'm delighted always that beyond the headlines when we can break these barriers, geographical barriers. Thank God for technology, as I always say. We have Dr. Thompson Fontaine. He's a former IMF Economist and presently the Deputy Chief Strategist with the South Sudan government, our African brother. We say good night and welcome to Grenada virtually.
Yes, it's my pleasure, and thank you, and good evening to my fellow panelists and to your viewers and listeners.
Great, and we're coming in studio, and we have the rose among the thorns. We have trade unionist Daisy Hazzard. It was a last-minute agreement. Daisy, thank you so much for agreeing. She told me she might have gotten here late, but she made the effort to get here for the start of the program. Daisy Hazzard is the public relations officer of the Public Workers Union. She's just wearing her hat as a trade unionist this evening. Daisy has a master's in international communication and also a master's in international journalism, and she represents workers. Daisy, it is so nice of you to agree to do this at the last minute.
Thank you, Odette. It's so wonderful to be here with you and to be among your illustrious panel. Thank you for leaning so heavily on me.
Great, and she's made it clear that probably she's not even wearing her trade unionist hat, but no. She's a mother, she's a woman, and she's seen how international developments impact society, and so she wants to lean on that side of the cap, that peak of the cap this evening. So we'll interrogate those issues. So let's cross to our panel. I'm going to start with our PS here in the Ministry of Finance. Mr. Sylvester, you're always placed in the hot seat because just when we think COVID was going away and things are going to settle down, you're thrust with these new developments. Tell us, for instance, what are your thoughts as you look ahead to the potential impact of the Ukraine war on our local economy?
Well, thank you, Odette, and again, I said good evening to all your listeners. And I would like to basically start from the perspective before the war, because we have to also understand that some of the issues that we are facing now predates the Russia invasion of Ukraine. Right? We would have seen, for example, since last year, significant increases in prices, domestic prices. Of course, those prices are internationally driven. So we've had, for example, the recovery in the global economy post, and I wouldn't say post COVID, because COVID is still around. So you'd have seen, as countries recover and so on, and demand for oil and so on would have actually impacted the prices, and as well as supply trade disruptions we've seen would have affected prices. And so we were experiencing and trying to deal with the whole issue of inflation here. You will recall in the last budget statement, the minister would have announced some measures to actually deal with the whole issue of food and fuel in particular. So we've had in recent times a cap on fuel at $15 per barrel, and we'll sort of speak to that a little more. We've also had, for instance, the removal of VAT on some basic food items, adding to the long list of exempt and zero-rated items. to try to mitigate some of the impact that consumers are actually facing in that regard. The recovery from the pandemic last year would have been very strong. Of course, as we now face with new challenges and new risks to the outlook, we also expect that to have some impact on economic growth in particular, and of course on prices and some of the other macroeconomic indicators.
Okay, great. And we've heard it as outlined there by the PS in the Ministry of Finance Grenada. Let's cross to Antigua. Ambassador Hurst, we saw some protest action, complaints by bus drivers. We look at that report a little later, but the trickle-down effect, we're looking at the Caribbean and how we could be impacted by the Ukrainian war, the Russian-Ukraine war. The trickle-down effects as far as Antigua is concerned, what is your strategy team thinking and saying at this time?
Well, there are two items that we know are going to be adversely affected by this war. There already have been. One is petroleum products, and the second is food. Now, the petroleum products, we have no control over their prices, except that there is a system in Antigua that allows for the government consumption tax to rise or fall, depending on the desire of the Antigua and Barbuda government to keep prices stable, so that if the consumption tax were responsible for bringing in, say, $2.50 a gallon, we saw prices rise, we could actually lower that consumption tax so that the price rise is not passed on to the consumer, but rather absorbed by the government. And on the other hand, of course, if the price falls, then you would have the opportunity for the government to make a little bit more in taxes on the petroleum products. We've reached a point where the $2.50 per gallon that we had placed on the revenues from petroleum products, we've seen that eviscerated, and as a consequence, we've had to raise the amount which the government and others receive as a result of the increase in prices. We've moved from $12.50 a gallon to $15.70 a gallon. And that, of course, allows the government to earn a little bit more than the $2 a gallon, somewhere between $2.50 and $2.50 a gallon. But on diesel, we are absolutely at a zero, because the price rise in diesel obliterated completely any profits, any taxes which the government made as a result of selling diesel. So diesel and gasoline have had increases, but those increases don't benefit the government in any way. Our value-added tax hardly reaches the $2.50 level. And in the case of food, well, we import food mostly from the United States. Some food. Our economy is about 5% agricultural, but the amount of food which we import varies depending on the amount of traffic we have in tourists. So in 2019, we had over 750,000 cruise ship tourists arriving in Antigua, and about 350 passengers arriving on aircraft, and they have to be fed. And when COVID struck, the number of passengers arriving in Antigua was almost down to zero, except for some yatis. And as a consequence, we did not, we had no need to import as much food as we did. But it is changing as the numbers have crept up again, and the number of tourists returning to Antigua, as that number has increased. And the number of cruise ship passengers as well coming to Antigua has also increased. So food and fuel, we say, are the two major items affected by this war.
Great. Food and fuel, and those are things that we depend on. As a mother, Daisy will be able to tell us about the food part. Let's cross to South Sudan and let's ask Dr. Fontaine. Dr. Fontaine, we know we've seen the reports coming out of the African continent, some of the most poverty-stricken states. Already in their natural state, things are difficult. So looking now at this new pending disaster with the war between Russia and Ukraine, what's the trickle-down effect on your side?
Yeah, one of the main impacts here, obviously, is the petrol prices. We've already been seeing major rises across most of the Africa region. But in addition, wheat imports. Africa imports most of its wheat from that region. Russia and Ukraine are among the largest wheat producers in the world. And with the onset of the war in Ukraine, we've seen that there has been a kind of a slowdown. Most of the ships that would normally take this wheat out of Russia and Ukraine, they have been stopped. So we are witnessing already some problems in the supply of wheat. In addition, fertilizers, another huge export coming out of Ukraine and Russia, that too is expected to have an impact on the agriculture sector in Africa. So it looks very, very bad, and it depends again on how long, how severe that war is, that we're going to see those impacts. But I can tell you the continent is preparing as best that it can, and this heavy dependence on imports is definitely affecting it. So we're already witnessing in some areas much price increases, not only the price of petrol, but everything that is linked to that, transportation fares, for example. And one of the major impacts that we can expect going forward, especially if this war is prolonged, will be the impact on real incomes, in that as inflation increases, which is a likely consequence of that shortage, you will find that wages will not be able to keep up with this increase in inflation. And over time, people become basically poorer because the real incomes will be falling.
And I see my good friend here, Miss Daisy Hazzard, trading, and she's nodding. So Daisy, already he's taken the wind out of your sails. You cannot ask the government for any salary increase at this time because of what is happening. But like you said, you wanted to put on your monthly cap first of all to talk about how all of this is going to impact families.
Yes, well, we definitely wouldn't go there to say that we wouldn't ask the government for a salary increase. But certainly,
don't go there.
I'm going there tonight because I'm here as a mother, as the head of a household. Odette, we might be tempted to say the war in Ukraine is far away. How does it affect me? And as the goodly gentlemen have pointed out, certainly there is the impact on the economy in measurable and quantifiable ways that we can perhaps map going forward. But what does it mean for the head of a household? Over 48% of our households in Grenada are headed by single women, heading households. These mothers, these women generally tend to have be in a lower income strata. So the question is for a mother, for the head of a household, for people managing budgets and so in the household, how do you prepare? How does this affect you now, and how does it affect you in the future? And I think that's the question that we all have to be trying to figure out within our own households, while the government is trying to figure out how the country is going to manage, what's the sort of a strategic responses that we are going to have on a national front within our own individual households. I think we all ought to be thinking about what sort of a meals we can prepare for our families, where can we cut, what areas within our budgets can be cut, and how can we really manage, what if the food becomes scarce, what if prices begin to skyrocket even more than we're seeing now? How do each individual homeowner respond to that? And the last panelist who spoke, our gentleman from the African continent, Dr. Fontaine, he spoke to rising fuel cost, rising cost of wheat on the world market. We know in Grenada that we consume a lot of flour, we consume a lot of chicken. all of our wheat is imported. Some of our chicken is locally produced, but a lot of it is imported. So how do families really go into their budget and ensure that they can continue to feed their families? He spoke about the real economy, and you're talking now about households that may be able to employ a gardener, may be able to employ someone to say, come wash the car, come give me some add-on services, and that in turn goes back into another family. And those are the areas where people initially would begin to cut. Once you have to cut a bit, you tend to say, what are the extras, what are the add-ons that the family can live without? But when you cut that out, it affects another family. Mm-hmm. And so we all must be concerned about that.
Great. Mr. Sylvester, sir, we've heard your two other panelists on Zoom allude to a very important point that you made in your opening comments, that of the price of food and the cost of fuel. We heard Antigua talk about the GCT variation. What are some of the measures adopted by Grenada? And like you said, this is not just limited to what is pending, but we've just come out of the COVID period. So what are some of the measures the government has been taking to cushion the effects of what we've been seeing happening on international market?
Right. So I started with fuel first of all. So, like all the countries of the OECS would have, I think, adopted what is called an automatic fuel pricing mechanism, right? So most of the cost of the oil is passed through to the final consumer. The variations there, for example, is on margins that are given to the dealers and the companies. So you have a differences in the margin. If you go from one country to the next, you will see that some countries give the importing companies, say, $1.25, other countries 90 cents, and so on and so forth. And then you have the tax issue, right? As Ambassador Hurst would have just said, in some countries, they have the consumption tax or the value-added tax or maybe customs service charge and some other taxes within that. While in Grenada, for example, we have what is called a petrol tax. So it's a single tax that is actually charged on the price of petrol. And so there's a build-up. So when you look at the build-up, it starts with the CIF, which is the cost insurance freight. So that is what is the landed cost of the petrol in Grenada, and then you of course add the margins and the tax. So what the government has done in recent times with respect to petrol is to apply what is called a cap at $15 per gallon at the pump for diesel and gasoline in particular. All right. What that means is that when you do the build up, as we've done for the months since the 18th of December, is that you're seeing that the actual price at the pump should be $16.00. It has risen in March to about $19.00. Yeah? So what has been taking the hit there with the cap is actually the petrol tax. And in the last, for March, for example, you're looking at government actually getting almost $1 in one case and less than $1 in another case with respect to the price at the pump. So that is one of the measures that would have been implemented. And you have other ways of actually doing that. I mean, we've had discussion, for example, the IMF. They're saying that allow the price to float, and then you can then do direct transfers to those vulnerable persons who are in need. In terms of other aspects of fuel price, we've had the electricity cost as well. So based on how the system is here, you have the actual fuel surcharge, and then you have a non-fuel charge, right? And the combination of those together with taxes and so on would give you the price that you pay in terms of electricity bills and so on. The government would have announced a 25% reduction in the non-fuel, the fuel rate, right? And as well as removal of the VAT and removal of the environmental levy on a certain level of consumption under 500 kilowatt per hour for residential consumption. That again would have impacted the electricity cost. But then again, we are seeing a countermeasure here with the rising cost of the fuel side of it. And so what we've seen since December, for example, is that the fuel surcharge would have moved from 48 cents to about 52 cents in March. And on every 7th of the month, the electricity company would change the fuel surcharge. And in fact, I mean, what we've seen since the war with the prices and so on, being very volatile. we believe that could even go further. I mean, and if you're talking about 60 something cents per kilowatt hour on the fuel side, you're talking about significant impact there for the regular consumers. So, I mean, you could have solutions there. I mean, you can do a further reduction of the non-fuel charge. How will that affect the sustainability of the company going forward and so on? You have to think through that. The government is sort of moving towards the whole issue of renewables. Of course, those will take time down the road, but to the extent that you can roll out a renewable program that would, whether it's in geothermal or solar, whatever the case may be, and you can have some stable base load, you may be able to reduce electricity prices going down the road. Now, in terms of social safety nets and trying to support those persons who really need, the vulnerable groups and so on, you have, for example, a temporary increase in the payments to the SEED program. The SEED, as you know, is the persons on social safety net registry and so on. Those persons would have gotten an additional increase of $150, which is a temporary measure for 1 year in the first instance, as well as some of the countries would have announced stimulus package. In Grenada's case, there was a second stimulus package that was announced in September of last year. And that program, again, would have provided some support to persons who are continuously affected, persons and businesses who are continuously being affected by the pandemic. So in terms of the response, you've seen the government is attempting to do some things to mitigate the cost of food and fuel and so on. I did mention earlier, for example, the measures on the value-added tax, where 5 additional items were added to the list. And with respect to ensuring that price control measures and so on, price control items are being closely monitored and so on. So I'll stop here.
I know you'd stop there, but I would just want to ask you, it was only recently that a cap was put on fuel prices at $15 a gallon. People are worried and jittery. Is the cap about to fall off, Mr. P.S.?
Well, I mean, I think you know the minister at the last cabinet press briefing. You have to continue to monitor the cap, right? You know, when the cap was instituted when, of course, before the Russia-Ukraine conflict. You've seen, for example, a significant swing in oil prices from around $70, $80 to $140. It has in recent times have come back a little bit. But I think based on all that's happening, the bias for the direction of oil prices seem to be above 100 based on what we see now. You may say it's very difficult to predict what will happen with oil prices, but if you were to keep it above 100, government would have to assess how that will impact on the fiscal revenues. We for example, at the $5.50 that government would have been collecting before the cap, you're talking about what, 60-something million in terms of annual collections. So assuming you were to remove that by maybe half of that, you're talking about a whole $30-something million in terms of revenue loss, or revenue that government would not be giving up to be able to support a lower price at the pump.
And therefore would not be able to afford Ms. Hazzard the salary increases that she's about to ask for. But that's a whole different story. Our PS mentioned safety nets, and I want to ask our other two panelists before I come to studio to ask Daisy about that as well. Let's go to Dr. Fontaine, and then we come back to Ambassador Hurst. Dr. Fontaine, in terms of safety nets, what is the government in South Sudan doing to help people deal with this impending storm?
Well, particularly the case of South Sudan, the answer is not much. And South Sudan happens to be a net oil exporter. Its main export is oil. So they're experiencing a huge boon. And also, it's a country that's emerging out of conflict as well. So a lot of resources have been spent in trying to repair the damage that was done during the war years. Civil war started there in 2013, 2 years after their independence, and it lasted until about 2017. So trying to recover out of that, it has put a lot of strain on the government's revenues. And also we have some very serious issues that we are contending with here in South Sudan, having to do with the management of oil resources, having to do with transparency and accountability. So they're really struggling, as it were, to really help out and to really cushion the blow. But that is something that you find traditionally governments try to do. And as you see in the case of Grenada and Dominica, from the country that I'm from as well, there has been a huge chorus really calling for the government to do something about the high petrol prices. I see Grenada has been proactive, Antigua, also Barbuda has been proactive, but I don't think St. Lucia and Dominica has gone the same road. So you find that oil prices are really elevated, and the question becomes, what do you do? Do you subsidize the prices, or do you do as they've done in Grenada and Barbados, put a cap on the petrol? Here, because in South Sudan, because it's a net exporter of oil, we don't have the same issue with the prices, in that whatever they have to give up, they're compensated. Because, for example, the budget was premised on an oil price of $55 a barrel. And right now, the prices are well over $110, $115. So they're really making a lot of money, a windfall as it were now. And they've been able, hopefully, the whole idea is that they can use those windfalls to do that. I think for the Caribbean, the only two countries that benefit in that way, the net exporters, Guyana and Trinidad. But for the rest of the Caribbean region, it's obviously a struggle.
It's basically a struggle. And Ambassador Hurst, it's basically a struggle, as we heard Dr. Fontaine saying. And how is the Antiguan government helping people navigate these present-day struggles?
Well, you might recall, of course, that we all suffered from the harmful effects of COVID. And in Antigua and Barbuda's case, where we are so dependent upon tourism, and all of our hotels were virtually shut down around March and didn't reopen or begin reopening until after June, we had a huge unemployment problem on our hands. Now, the way we cope with that is by providing not a direct payment to any group of workers, although the hotel workers had savings, and that savings was intended to be distributed to them at the end of their careers. But a portion of that savings was allowed to be distributed to them at that time because it meant that they could then feed their families, since there is no unemployment insurance, and the government could not clearly afford to take on the vast majority of workers. And if there's any one group of workers that measure significant numbers, it's the hotel workers, because that's what we do for a living. And so they depended essentially on the resources that had been saved by them. And we, as a government, distributed some food packages to those who were who found themselves in dire need. We also spoke to the banks. The banks granted a moratorium on the loan which indigent family would have had. Although you might think that if you can borrow money from a bank, you can't be that indigent. But many of the community credit unions and also some of the commercial banks had extended loans, mostly for home building and in some instances for automobiles and for businesses, small businesses. So we appealed to the banks. Now, this is during COVID, and in essence, COVID has decreased significantly. Its impact upon Antigua and Barbuda has lessened significantly. We see the return of tourists, both cruise ships as well as overnight passengers, and they spend considerable sums of money in Antigua and Barbuda. And so the question is, having recovered some of our tourism, whether or not we need to provide the same kind of support. Well, along comes the war, and it has made so many goods, especially food and fuel, so very expensive that we're looking at ways to reduce the impact upon the indigent folks in Antigua and Barbuda. And the way we do it is by providing, again, some vouchers for those whose incomes have fallen off. We provide some vouchers for them to purchase food from supermarkets. A number of supermarkets have agreed to participate in the program, and we provide some vouchers for those who are willing to utilize that source. And again, we have reduced significantly the amounts which we collect in the value-added tax, as my friend from Grenada has called it. We are moving to lessen the impact for fuel, because our public transport system is not nearly as well organized as they say it might be in a place like Grenada. And instead, we rely upon the automobile. So there are many, many automobiles in Antigua, and the government of Antigua and Barbuda had actually eliminated some of the taxes on automobiles in order to encourage automobile ownership, knowing that as a result of purchasing fuel, insurance, and other kinds of services to keep the automobile going, that insurance, for example, that the government would recover some of the lost taxes that would normally be collected at the time of import. So we reduced those. It caused a spur in automobile purchase, but it also generated additional income from the sale of fuel as well as insurance, and even some of the loans from the banks. But our attempt at reducing the impact upon the most vulnerable, and this is especially those who are beyond working age, that becomes an important part of the package of assistance which the government clearly tries its very best to address. Where pensions are concerned, in ensuring that they're paid on time to the best of our ability, and of course ensure that landlords do not throw those who cannot afford out of their homes. And with that, we have been able also to get moratoriums with several of the landlords who rent homes to the very indigent. We've also been repairing the homes of some indigent people because we know that they can't afford it, and we pray that there are no hurricanes in 2022 to set us any further back.
Ambassador, my good friend in the studio here, Daisy, is smiling because I suppose she's hearing some common themes. But even before she goes to dissect the common themes, Daisy, I'm putting you in the spot. We need to take a commercial break, so you'll have 30 seconds to answer this, rapid fire. You're the Minister for Finance, or you're the Minister for Social Development, and you have to put some safety nets in place. What are your first 3 safety nets you'll put in place to help people overcome the struggles that they're now facing?
Thank you, Odette, for putting me on the spot. Well, one, we have to take care of our younger children. So definitely, as Minister for Social Development, Finance, I would ensure that there's some price reduction in terms of necessitous baby foods like milk, things that children need for their nutrition and survival. And we also have to take care of our seniors, not just the persons who are on seed, but in general our seniors, persons who are retired and on pensions, and persons who are retired and not on pensions at all. So it would be the seniors among us, the indigent among us, children.
Okay.
Yes.
In the hot seat, and she's delivered well. This is Beyond the Headlines. Tonight we're looking at the Ukraine war, the potential impact on Caribbean economies. We have a very distinguished panel with us this evening. We have the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance. We have Ambassador Lionel Hurst out of Antigua and Barbuda, and we have Dr. Fontaine out of South Sudan. And in studio, Daisy Hazzard. We'll be right back.
The Nawasa app brings the power of Nawasa's customer service experience to you. Instant, conversational, and smart. Easy access anywhere. Get bill balance, transaction history for up to 6 months, report a fault, link to websites, view payment centers, contact information, push notifications, and multi-tenant accounts, all in a secure login platform. Like a self-service concierge app, mobile.nawasa.gd gets you the support you need much faster. Available on both Android and iOS platforms. Mobile.nawasa.gd, your customer support companion. Nawasa, committed to meeting customers' needs.
Just a reminder, the global pandemic is not over. Office Pros and markers are still here to protect you. Available are several versions of touchless hand sanitizer and hand soap dispensers, dispenser stands, paper towel and toilet paper dispensers, and thermometers. Also available, hand sanitizing gel, sanitizing solution, hand soap, Lysol products, face masks, and gloves offered at the best price in the market and backed by a full warranty and protection plan with free installation. We are located on the Woodlands Main Road. Call Office Pros on 444-2393 or Markers on 439-2393. You can also visit the Facebook page for more information. And never forget to remember, I, Mr. Markers, would never forsake you. Believe that.
We support you at every stage of your life.
For business,
for your education,
for your financial freedom,
for that new ride.
Upgrade your life with the Communal. Contact us today.
If there was ever a time to keep and stay healthy, it's now! We at Hills and Valley are here to help you take deliberate steps to maintain your health. We stayed true to maintaining the most comprehensive rates while stocking the widest range of medicines and health devices, including personal protective equipment. There are so many benefits shopping with us. You get great savings through discounts for senior citizens and reward cards for loyal customers. Ask about owning yours today. Visit us at Halifax and Grenville Street, St. George, Jubilee Street opposite the Grenville Bus Terminal, and at Hillsborough, Carrico. Our wholesale distribution on Halifax Street also stocks the widest range of pharmaceuticals. We are with you on the hills and in the valleys. We are Hills and Valley Pharmacy.
Have you heard about the new Softweave bathroom tissue with total hygiene? As hygiene and safety have taken center stage, our bathroom tissue is now manufactured with 3 different technologies to offer the best protection for you and your family. UVC light technology for a safe and effective disinfection process, eliminating 99.9% of microorganisms. Also, production at high temperatures, killing all types of germs and bacteria. And it's pH controlled with delicate fibers to prevent irritation for even sensitive skin. Softweave Total Hygiene Bathroom Tissue. Available in supermarkets and shops island-wide. Visit Softweave Caribbean Facebook or Instagram pages for more information.
Here is a little known fact. There is only one place in Grenada that you can get an MRI scan done. That place is Spicile Imaging Center. Yes, Grenada, that's the truth. Other centers could offer you other scans, but Spicile Imaging provides an authentic MRI scan. Here's another little known fact. Spicile Imaging has 3 centers. We operate at Grenville, the Carnage, and at the Ocean House, Grand Anse. We provide the widest range of laboratory tests and services. CT scans, x-rays, mammograms, ultrasounds, and a host of other services. We are fully staffed by a team of family doctors and specialists. Call us today at 444-7679. or 406-1500, or visit any of our 3 locations. Spicile Imaging, from seeing the doctor to getting lab tests, scans, and pharmacy services. We are here to take care of you.
You can now send a gift card to your loved ones locally or internationally thanks to the food fair. Here's how it works. Click the gift card icon or banner, customize your gift card by choosing from different templates, dollar amount, and personalized messages. You can also upload your personal design. Select Add to Cart and complete transaction. Allow relatives and friends to pick up an item or items at the food fair for the dollar value. Gift card, it's that easy.
When you need your prescription filled or you require non-prescribed medication, supplements, or all your personal needs, visit Gittins Healthcare at locations on Wall Street, Grand Anse, Victoria Street, Grenville, and Central Deputy Street, Wharf. Gittins Healthcare aims to provide an exceptional personalized pharmacy experience. Additionally, children under 5 and adults 55 years and over will enjoy 10% discount on purchases of $20 and over on prescription medication. Stop settling for less. Visit Gittins Healthcare, where your health is our priority.
Let's start the new year on a high, a detox high, because it's detox time again at Nirvana Detox Center and Natural Health Store. Check out our many detox packages starting from $100 or get 15% off on colonic irrigation therapy. Detoxing can help with liver and blood cleansing, weight loss, constipation, acid reflux, kidney stones, heavy metal removal, gas and bloating, and more. Call or WhatsApp us on 231-6642, 418-7115, or 449-7753. Ask about our delivery options. Visit us now. Bruce Street Mall, store number 1208, or Belmont St. George's, close to the Fall Edge area. Our opening hours are Monday to Saturday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Nirvana Detox Center and Natural Health Store. Detox your way to health. These specials ends on March 31st or while stocks last.
Your life is yours, your future's in your hands. Your body is yours, that's why you need a plan. You gotta plan your family, avoid HIV, get the education from the Grenada Planned Parenthood Association.
We offer STI screening, gender-based violence counseling, prenatal and postnatal checks, injectables, condoms, pap smears, and other sexual reproductive services. Open Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. The Pointe Street, St. George's. Whether male or female, it doesn't matter. We're here to make your life better.
Grenada Planned Parenthood Association.
For appointments, call 440-3341.
And welcome back to Beyond the Headlines. This evening we're asking, how will the war in Ukraine, the Russian-Ukrainian war, affect your pocket? We're asking the Permanent Secretary in Grenada's Finance Ministry, Mr. Mike Sylvester, had a 3.5-year stint at the International Monetary Fund. Ambassador Lionel Hurst, Antigua and Barbuda's former ambassador to the United Nations, the OAS, and the United States. He's presently the Chief of Staff in the Prime Minister's Ministry in Antigua, Barbuda. Dr. Thompson Fontaine, let me get it right, Dr. Thompson Fontaine, the former IMF Economist, presently Deputy Chief Strategist with the South Sudan government. And in studio, trade unionist, mother, social activist, Daisy Hazzard. So we're continuing the discussion, and a little later, gentlemen and lady, I want to ask the question, where really are the oil prices? We had a tweet coming out from President Biden, which we'll come to in a little bit. One of the things we like to do with Beyond the Headlines is to go beyond the local rah-rah-rah, because we talk about things within our own confines, but when we hear from people across the world, across the region, it helps us put things into perspective. So we've heard some common themes coming out of Antigua based on what our PS Mike outlined, and we've heard Dr. Fontaine outlining some of the challenges that they face in Sudan as well. So I saw you nodding vigorously when Ambassador Hurst was speaking, Daisy. What was that trend of thought going through your mind?
Well, the trend of thought is that, first of all, he said the word pensioner. And that really got my heart pumping. And we all would know why. Because, I'm thinking about these pensioners who are out there without any sort of a retirement benefits, but do still have to live and survive in this society. And however the ongoing crisis unfolds, it will also affect them. He's speaking about households and indigent persons, people who will be more adversely affected because of their incomes or lack of incomes. And so the themes all over is about the same. But it also caught me when Dr. Fontaine spoke, and he said, well, for them, so far, it's not been a bad war. I'm paraphrasing, because the projection for the cost of a barrel of oil, that has soared to almost double. And it came to mind that war, sickness, is always somehow mixed up with oil. And there are so many people who benefit out of war and who benefit out of sickness, as we saw with the ongoing pandemic, and while the majority is still so adversely affected. And the cycles that we face and confront in the world never really seems to change. We get some easement from time to time. At the start of the year, we all were breathing a little sigh of relief because we thought, now we can breathe from the COVID. And here we are. The unthinkable has happened. A country which was once a great superpower that we thought were nullified. I mean, growing up, I grew up in the 80s thinking all the time about the Cold War, about this Russia and USA that had warheads, nuclear warheads pointed at each other. And then that de-escalated in the 90s. And here we are in 2022. The unthinkable has happened. And possibly even more than the unthinkable can happen, because there is the threat, the sort of a veiled and unveiled threat of nuclear war. And so how is that going to affect our societies going forward? And I'm also wondering, every time there is a crisis in the world, we have to sort of scramble back and say, how do we manage, how do we cope? And what, as a mother, as a parent, as a social activist, what I would like to see as a Caribbean region, as a Grenada, is that there is a comprehensive sort of a strategy that we can pull out, that is done, that we can pull out that says, this is the crisis we're facing now. This is the pandemic we're facing now. Let's pull this out and retrofit it to fit the situation. But it takes care of our food security or food insecurity problems. Everything comes to Grenada by sea. It's not new. It's not happening now because there's a war in Ukraine. It's not happening now because there's a pandemic. It always happens. So how do we as a country, as a government, as a people, as homeowners, as householders, plan strategically to deal with those things so that every time a crisis emerges in the world, it does not necessarily shock us too much, because the crisis will affect us, but we can cope, we can manage. And those were the thoughts that were going through my head.
I saw some deep thoughts for true. And let me go back to P.S. Sylvester. Sometimes I feel sorry for you guys, and I would like for you to probably explain to the Grenadian public, P.S. Sylvester, how do you cope? Because you're on this trajectory, and you think, well, okay, we're getting to a place called there, and then, bada, bullets are fired, tanks are blown up, and now you have to scramble, as Daisy would have said. How do you cope with the back and forth, and just when you think you have it settled, you have to get a new strategy again?
Well, I mean, if you've been in the situation as long as I have been, I tend to say that you've seen it all. I mean, we've had a lot of challenges to deal with as small island developing states, and I think most of the countries, or all the countries across the region and so on, would have had to deal with these issues. And you remember, you're starting from a position where you're small, you're remote in some case, you have disadvantages. You'll be set with a whole set of challenges. And in addition to that, you have to then deal with some of the issues that are not of your own doing. So right now, for example, we're battling with climate change. We're battling with war that are not even started by here. So it's something that you have to continue to build. And one of the things I think Daisy mentioned and Ms. Hazzard mentioned is the issue of having a sustainable development plan, right? Where, for example, and you have to understand that a plan has to be dynamic. It cannot be a static plan, because you can't foresee all of these things, right? You cannot foresee all of these things, but you can plan or move along your economic cycle, with a strategy that nothing surprises you. And I think that is how we need to approach some of these things. As things come up, you have to be able to adjust and adapt and be able to continue to grow from strength to strength. So in that context, I think one of the things that we need to do as a region, and in fact in Grenada in particular, is to build resilience and building resilience to all of the major things that we face. So for example, we had the pandemic. When the strategic plan was articulated, nobody had any thoughts in their head about a pandemic of the nature. So I'm saying that within Grenada, I would say. So I don't know about outside in terms of persons thinking about that, but within Grenada, nobody had that in the mind. So when the pandemic struck, you then have to adapt and adjust. The good thing about Grenada at that particular time is that we were at a position where you had some buffers. So you were kind of entering the pandemic from a position of strength, I would say, right? So you find that you were able to meet some of your commitments, whether it's wages and salaries and supplies and so on and so forth. And to be able to even do investments that will help drive the recovery. And that is what you've seen, or you'd have seen from the pandemic side. But now that you've gotten to a stage now when you say, okay, let's take a breather. We are talking about a war in Ukraine that would have significant implications for Grenada and the region. And that's not all, because when you look at the risk matrix that we are facing, we have a lot of other issues, right? So you have the perennial problem of natural disasters. God forbid we have a double whammy this year with a natural disaster and having to deal with the Ukraine issue. Then, how do we survive? You also have the issue with interest rates and inflation. In the US, for example, the Fed just announced that there's going to be a hike in interest rate. The implications for our countries here with respect to access to credit and so on, that is another major problem that we have to deal with. And then the pandemic has not gone away. I mean, sometimes we tend to believe that it has gone away, but the pandemic has gone away. If you look at what's happening in China and some of the other places where you have breakouts again. So it's just something that you have to continually plan. And I think how you can deal with that is the whole issue of building resilience as small countries. You have challenges. For example, natural disasters. If we have stronger infrastructure that can deal with, for example, a Category 5 hurricane, right? If we have fiscal buffers that are set aside, whether it's a contingency fund or whether it's some kind of hurricane fund, that when a disaster hits, you can easily tap into that to be able to recover, right? Whether you have, for example, in your debt instruments, hurricane clauses and so on, or contingent instruments. So with that, for example, if there's a hurricane, automatically your debt payment goes on pause for a while to allow you that kind of breathing space to be able to recover during that period. So all of these things will help you to build resilience as a small island. I think those are the things that we need to focus on. Renewable energy, I mentioned that earlier. So it's really building resilience, and it's the same thing for our family, because as Hazzard would have mentioned, families face some of the same issues that countries face. The families are sort of microcosm of the country, So within the family, how do you build resilience? How do you start developing a emergency fund, right? Insurance, life insurance, and those kind of things. Some of the same things that you really have to look at. I think the word is really resilience.
The word is resilience. And while we talk about resilience, fuel prices coming up, it's an important facet of life. I want to cross to South Sudan. And there's a tweet that came from US President Joe Biden, and it caused me to have some kind of question in my mind. And that's why I'm glad that we have the experts. So Dr. Fontaine, he said, President Biden said, oil prices are decreasing. Gas prices should too. Last time oil was $96 a barrel. Gas was $3.62 a gallon. Now it's $4.31. Oil and gas companies shouldn't pad their profits at the expense of hard-working Americans. Explain that to us, if you may, Dr. Fontaine.
Yes, that is certainly an excellent issue to discuss, because we make the distinction between the oil prices, or the crude oil, and then the refined petroleum and diesel prices. So what the president was alluding to is the fact that you could have a situation where you have declining oil prices, yet the petrol prices are increasing. And the reason for that is quite simple. The oil market is probably one of the most, what we call, perfect markets that you have. But it is impacted by two major factors. Those factors that we consider to be fundamental factors, that are issues like supply and demand issues. So, for example, in the current context, given that Russia is the third largest exporter of oil, if you remove this supply from the market, you will find that the prices go up. On the other hand, you have speculation where people believe that certain events in the future, they allow that to impact their decision to buy or sell oil currently, which impacts the price. So a good example of this, for example, was last week when oil prices had reached $150 a barrel. And then there was news that Russia may be considering a serious peace deal with the Ukraine. Almost immediately, the price of oil dropped to below $100. But at the same time, the price of petrol remained elevated. So you have the instantaneous reaction of the market to oil, but the petroleum prices the prices at the pump, they tend to be less elastic. They move more slowly. And the other thing is, once retailers increase their prices, they are a lot less willing to lower those prices because they tend to make profits. So you'll find a very common term that we use in economics is that prices are sticky upwards, in that once they begin to rise, it is very difficult for them to come down. So the important distinction that the president was trying to make, he was trying to say, well, the retailers should not be taking advantage of the situation, that they should allow the price of petrol to track the price of oil. But that is something, as we say, in every country you have these unscrupulous behaviors. For example, there was a discussion in Dominica just last week in that people were saying that there were no new supplies of oil into Dominica, of petrol, yet the price of petrol at the pump was rising steadily. And people were saying, why should that be? And then the government says, well, the price of petrol reflects what's happening on the world market. But some people say, well, this is unfair. It's unfair because you should not put the higher world price immediately on stocks that are not impacted. But you have that type of behavior, and it's something that I believe that most countries are wrestling with. And just the idea that you have profiteers. Anytime you have the situation, people will try to profit from it. But the real issue there is this oil shock. And then the question then becomes as well, how do you feel that gap? A lot of countries are avoiding Russian oil. How do you fill that gap? The feeling is that some of the Middle Eastern countries may actually increase their output. They might expand their output. There is talk right now, for example, the US is going back to Venezuela to see if they can get Venezuela to crank up its output so that they could take some of that slack. So these are the issues that you're wrestling with. But in the midst of all of this, what you can almost be sure of is that as long as the war continues, with that speculative behavior I spoke about, with those shocks, with those fundamentals, that the price of petrol may very well remain above $100 for a very long time.
Thanks for breaking that down for us. Because I always wondered about the differentiation between the two, and it comes home to the consumer and to even service providers. We'll go to Ambassador Hurst shortly, but first let's go to a video recording we had last week with the bus associations in Antigua complaining about that very disconnect. Let's go to that and then we come to Ambassador Hurst.
The Honourable Prime Minister tell this Honourable House what is the reason for an immediate increase in the cost of fuel. Mr. Speaker, almost on a weekly or bi-monthly basis, you hear me now? Almost on a weekly to bi-monthly basis, there are new supplies of petroleum products, and what I've been told is that as recent as a few days ago, a new shipment came in at the new price.
We're speaking to bus drivers about the price increase and how they plan to mitigate it. For example, if they may need to increase the bus fee, and you were explaining to me that you guys can do it on your own.
Well, what I was saying to you, right, pertaining to fare increase, the government is the one that regulates fares. We have nothing to do with that. But pertaining to the hike of the gas, I don't even know how to explain it, because that is criminal. Because we just came out of, should I say, the pandemic, and we were actually operating at a loss, carrying 9 people for about 2 years. So you're talking about every trip you make, you lose about $16, right? And after we were told, because I like to listen to the news, we were told we have enough in reserve for basically 6 months. Then you wake up one morning and $3 and what? 50 cents or 70 cents is on the money. If I have the power in terms of all the other drivers, we'll strike immediately.
And I understand you guys wouldn't have a price increase or a fare increase in about 17, 18 years?
Yes, the last time we have a price increase, I was the president of the association. The Honorable Sir Lesterberg was, God bless his soul, was the Prime Minister. So that will show you how long we did not get an increase.
My thing is, right, because at presently when you hear somebody goes on the radio station and make a comment, and a day after you go by the pump and there's a price increase, I think that is madness on behalf of the Prime Minister. I think you need to reschedule and come again. But on your question is, it's going to be hard for consumers, because a gallon of gas, as it is now, is more than the minimum wage. And if people is not getting wage, and you're going to raise the price increase on the buses, come on, it's going to be hard. And as my co just tell you just now, if it was in my corner, we would just call a strike right away.
So, Ambassador Hurst, how does the Antiguan government explain that to the irate bus operators like we just heard? They called it criminal and madness.
Yes, there is, as you can well imagine, every attempt by every group to secure their profits. And whenever an action is taken which could possibly erode some of the profits being made, you can imagine that they would wish to do everything they possibly can and make every threat that is possible in order to ensure that they do not suffer. So it is impossible to purchase fuel at a price that would allow it to be sold for $12.50 without the government, $12.70. Well, it was $12.50 and it moved to $15.70. But it would be impossible for the government not to increase the prices and to continue to sell gasoline at the price at which they sold last week. And that has to do with the price pass-through mechanism. The cost insurance freight and the value of the petroleum that is being sold to the importer in Antigua and Barbuda is already at $12.50. And so you couldn't possibly move it from the importer to the distributor, then to the retailer, and also expect the government to forego any taxes at all that petroleum would attract, because within the budgetary system of Antigua and Barbuda, the value of the taxes to be earned from selling petroleum, those taxes are computed in the government's revenue stream. And it would be impossible for the government to tell the retailers of fuel that they must sell it at a price at which they don't make a profit either. So as long as you are going to have a price pass-through mechanism, and as long as those who are importing the product must at least pay more than the $12.50 a gallon, or an amount equal to $12.50 a gallon, then it becomes impossible for it to be sold at the retail level for $12.50. So what the government has done in this case, recognizing the impact it would have on those who travel on buses, what the government has done is to guarantee that there would be a 50% reduction in the amount which the government would take in if it sold it at the $15.70 level. So for the $15.70 level, the government would take in about $2. We're going to take 50% off that so that the bus drivers can have their fuel purchased at a lower price than others. And by the way, this is not the first time that this has happened. We did this for a while during the COVID crisis, because we mandated, as the bus driver reported, we mandated that fewer people travel on the buses together so that there would be less of an opportunity for there to be infections caused as a result of being too closely together in the buses and in the taxis. And so we reduced it for that purpose. And we're going back to that during this Ukrainian-Russian war, so long as we hope that it doesn't last for a very long time. But the object always is to ensure that everybody can make a little bit of the profits from it. And that includes the bus drivers, the taxi drivers, and of course the government of Antigua and Barbuda, whose revenue is very much dependent upon those monies coming through from the sale of gasoline. Let me also mention, while I have the floor, that one other program which we utilize in order to gain revenue without taxes is the Citizenship by Investment program. And we now have the United States Congress, well, several members of the United States Congress, doing their very best to end our CIP programs, or CBI programs, as some others call them.
And definitely, Ambassador, that is something that we want to touch on. But while we're dealing with the trickle-down effect, I wanted to just we'll come back to the CBI program because it is important, and we've seen what the congressmen have been trying to do. Madam Mother, you're looking at the correlation, and we've had Dr. Fontaine talking about the comment made by President Biden, and we've seen the protests in Antigua, and we've heard the explanation from Ambassador Hurst. In Grenada, we know people are very jittery. Will this $15 cap last, or will it fall off? As a mother now, you're thinking, well, I know I probably need to shell out some more to pay for my child's bus fee.
Yes. Absolutely. I mean, last Friday, I think it was, I stopped at the pump and I filled up, and the gas attendant said to me, there has been so many people coming to the pump. I think it was Wednesday, prior to Dr. Mitchell's address. So many people were just filling up their tanks. And I think it was an anxiety that, is the price going to raise at all? And my child takes a car, but in my household, we use more than one vehicle. And the conversation that we've been having is, how do we attempt to carpool? Because in the past, how large families had just one vehicle, and the families made do. Now, leaving from homes every morning, going back in the evening, one occupant in a vehicle, 2, 3, 4 cars leaving from one household. So we've sort of become kind of used to a bit of that kind of a luxury. We have our children that have to take the buses. Some children take more than one bus. So as a householder, how do you cut and contrive? You can't control the price that you pay for bus fares. I can control perhaps how we carpool together from my household. Other families can do that. But for the households that's using the buses, what is your recourse? And so certainly we are hoping, as a parent, I'm hoping that the government can still see it fit and find a way to keep that cap on gasoline, especially for the public that has to rely on taking the buses to get their children to school, and for those of us who do also have to use our private transport. So we really just have to hope and pray that the situation stabilizes, and that even as the prices go up, the CIF, causes prices locally to go up. Hopefully the government should be able to find a way to keep that cap on. Okay.
P.S. Sylvester, you want to comment on anything, any other points made by Dr. Fontaine or Ambassador Hurst, or even the appeal made here by the mother in the studio?
Yes.
Well, sure. I mean, we have to I mean, the situation we're facing is very serious. And I mean, because of the level of uncertainty that we're facing, it's very difficult to manage in this particular period. I mean, I think you're quite all aware of that, because you have to, find a menu of measures to be able to respond to what is happening, and at the same time, address some of the fundamental issues that you're facing. So in terms of the cap, and I mean, I recall, for example, when we had the 2007-2008 food and fuel crisis. In fact, I think at the time, the price of a barrel of oil rose to $147-48 a barrel. And in Grenada then, the price was capped at $7. And that was for a very long while. And in fact, the issue that Ambassador Hurst raised, where, for example, the landed cost was way higher than that. And so you have what you had happening, where the government was getting no taxes, and then you had the government accruing arrears or having to pay the importers, so the Sol in your case and the rubies, having to pay them to bring oil because they were losing their margins and more, right? So you could have a similar situation here with a cap remaining at a particular point. So we have to continue to monitor that, and that's what we're doing at this particular stage in terms of where government revenues are going, how far it's going to go into the government revenues, how long you can sustain that, because that's the other issue. Whether and to what extent government can sustain that if this ends up to be a prolonged crisis. I mean, if it's a short-term thing, then of course you can perhaps over the period provide support and ensure it stay at a particular level. But you don't want to have a situation where when you move the cap, or when you have to move the cap, or you're forced to move the cap, you jump from, say, $15 to, say, $25. I mean, that in itself, people will react to that very, 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 very harshly. And so what has been happening with the automatic fuel pricing mechanism, which I think is something that has worked well for us, is that what it does, you look at prices for the last 4 months. So you take the average posting for the last 4 weeks, 4 weeks, and you get that as your base, and then you basically add your margins, and then you add your tax, and then that price is changed at the pump every 18th of the month. Now, Dr. Fontaine would have mentioned, for example, the response to President Biden's tweet and so on. But you have a situation where, for example, if you were to change that, in other words, if you were to change the price every week or every day, which I think is perhaps administratively impossible, what you would have is that you would really reflect the prices more realistically in terms of when you have the swings and when you have the highs and the lows and so on. So what it does is average the posting for the last month or so. That's what I say. As opposed to every week you adjust the price at the pump, and so you have this level of volatility that you're seeing. But I think at the end of the day, it deals with the variations in prices over a certain period, and so that is sort of dealt with through that. So I think I'll stop here. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And at this juncture, we'll take a commercial break and we'll come right back. We tried to entertain a few calls before we wrap it up this evening. The number you can call when we get back, 440-1252, 440-1252. We take a commercial break and we'll be right back.
When a loved one passes on, we all need the comfort, support, and guidance of a trusted friend. You can rely on LaCour Brothers Funeral Home. We provide a personalized professional service that exceeds all expectations. Our dedicated staff responds to your every need with the greatest detail, ensuring affordability with a variety of options. Our upgraded state-of-the-art facilities, spacious air-conditioned chapel with live internet streaming, a modern, environmentally safe crematorium, the only of its kind on island, private viewing spaces, large on-site repast center, a modern transportation fleet. Join our burial society today and make personalized arrangements for that final moment as you prepare to enter your loved one into eternal rest. Visit or call LaCour Brothers Funeral Home and select a package that brings added comfort to the entire family. LaCour Brothers Funeral Home and Burial Society, continuing a tradition of excellence.
Imagine
having the home of your dreams. Imagine investing in that piece of property you can call your own. Imagine finally doing that home improvement project you've always been thinking about. It's time to stop imagining and start doing. Let the GUT Credit Union help you take the first step with fantastic rates, affordable repayments, and reduced legal fees. Make the move. Get better terms on your mortgage. Use your home equity to make those dreams a reality. Act now. There's really no place like home. GUT Credit Union. It's where you belong.
And avoid lines? Use the online banking feature from Republic Bank, First Caribbean, or Co-op Bank. Contact them today to set up your online banking and enjoy 24-hour convenience to make your bill payments. Stay safe. Grenlec, we are united even when we are apart.
Introducing Color by Sissons.
Gas, clean, safe, and reliable LPG is the perfect solution for your commercial and everyday needs. For cooking at home or barbecuing, choose Rubigas LPG cylinders. Available in a variety of sizes from 20 to 100 pound cylinders. Rubigas LPG, clean, safe, reliable. Are you cooking with Rubigas? Get Rubis, get going.
Welcome back to Beyond the Headlines. Last week at a national address, Grenada's Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Dr. Keith Mitchell, alluded to the upending of the world order. And this evening, we're dissecting some of those issues with our panelists, the Permanent Secretary in Grenada's Finance Ministry, Mr. Mike Sylvester, Ambassador Lionel Hurst. He's Antigua and Barbuda's former ambassador to the United Nations, the OAS, and the United States, and he's now the Chief of Staff in the Prime Minister's Ministry in Antigua, Barbuda. We also have with us from South Sudan, Dr. Thompson Fontaine. He is presently the Deputy Chief Strategist with the South Sudan government, and he's also served as an economist with the International Monetary Fund. And in studio we have trade unionist Daisy Hazzard, but we've taken that hat off a little bit and put it on the side so she can play her role as mother and as social activist working on behalf of families to help them navigate this very difficult period. And before we went to commercial break, Ambassador Hurst alluded to a new challenge facing Grenada and some other Caribbean countries. They depend on the Citizenship by Investment program as a large slice of their revenues. And Ambassador Hurst, we would ask you to pick up on that, and then we'll ask the Permanent Secretary in Grenada's Finance Ministry for his thoughts on this as well, and then we'll ask Ambassador Fontaine to weigh in on it as well. So let's start with you, Ambassador Hurst, as you started discussing it prior to the commercial break.
Surely, this program has been in effect in Antigua for 8 years, and during that 8-year period, it has yielded a little more than $1 billion EC dollars to the government of Antigua and Barbuda. Now, that revenue source is of great importance to Antigua and Barbuda, as you can imagine. And we have the U.S. congresspersons and also the European Union in its capacity as the leadership, the EU's spokesperson, also indicating that their intention is to bring to an end these CIP programs, because they say that the people who we sell our citizenship to are crooks and other kinds of nasty names. History will prove that to be quite untruthful, and that our due diligence systems weed out those kinds of people from becoming citizens of our countries. But we recognize that many of those countries themselves, especially the United States, engages in the same kind of residency and citizenship for sale program that the Antigua and Barbuda and other OECS countries are engaged in. It is an important part of our revenue. And so we have said to them that we would wish them to take a look at what we do. And so we're setting up this commission, which we hope the other OECS countries will all that are involved in citizenship by investment programs. We're setting up this commission that we think will interface with the European Union and the United States, and in fact demonstrate that the claim that it is being made is false, and that the United States doesn't stand to gain anything by it, except, of course, the erosion of revenues in countries like our own. And it is really unfortunate, because we were once a gaming nation, and we made significant sums doing this, and also significant employment. And because of the United States, we are unable to do it any longer, just about. And the WTO ruled in our favor. And the United States now owes us in excess of $200 million because the WTO ruled a $21 million a year damage from this thing, and it's been going on for 10 years or more since the decision-making at the WTO took place. So we know that some of these new systems of earning revenue that small countries have developed are under threat. And yet we are unable to get our good friend, the United States, to stand in our defense. We are the third border of the United States, and yet the United States will treat us as though somehow we stand in danger. We cause the United States to be in danger by engaging in this program or that program. And so our expectation is that having made the kind of approach to the U.S. as we have been making, that they will back off from this and not cause our countries to be further pushed into underdevelopment as a consequence of a fear of a security that does not exist.
And Mr. Sylvester, it's an issue that Grenada has to contend with as well?
Well, yes, and I want to underscore the importance of the CBI program. I think the Ambassador Hurst would have gone into significant details in terms of the importance of the program for revenues, fiscal revenues, and also economic development and growth and so on. So yes, any impact or negative to that program will affect us significantly. We have, for example, right now, with respect to the war that's happening, and most of the countries would have put out sort of pullback statements in terms of Russians and Belarusian nationals and so on. And that, of course, will have a significant impact on us. We, for example, 20% of our files now come from Russia. And so right there and then, you would have an impact on the amount of revenues and so on that we can collect as part of our National Transformation Fund, to be able to undertake important capital investment. And the bigger point that was raised with respect to what is happening in Europe and US and so on That, of course, will have significant impact on the program itself. You would know that we've had, for example, in the past, the offshore industry, which was sort of stifled by some of the same measures that have been put in place and so on. That would have an impact. And we have to, in a way, find ways and means to be able to push back. But at the same time, we have to think, because you can't, I mean, even if you want to think through this long term, in terms of where this might go, you have to, of course, plan and see how you can divert and divest into other nodes of growth at the same time. But then again, you still face the challenge of whether to what extent those nodes of growth will meet some of the same challenges that we have. But right now, I think the problem that is facing us directly in our face is that we need to address what is happening in terms of the CIP programs or the CBI programs, as you want to call them.
Okay. And Dr. Fontaine, what is your take on all of this? Probably, let's say you're an outsider looking in, because these Caribbean countries are the ones that find themselves under this kind of scrutiny, and the U.S., the mighty power, coming out with this big stick on these programs. What is your take as an economist on this? Some people think we should not be selling our passports to Russians. The government's outlined as a major source of revenue.
Well, what the Russian war has done is to bring this into very sharp focus. And one thing is certain from what I have seen is that this program will come to an end sooner rather than later. Now, why do I say that? The European Parliament, they're moving forward with legislation to prevent the free countries within Europe that still have those programs, Malta, Bulgaria, and Greece. They've given them until 2025 to phase out their programs. At the same time, if you read the legislation that they've proposed, it is very clear. They mentioned Dominica, Grenada, St. Lucia, Antigua, St. Kitts and Nevis by name, as indicating that these countries pose a threat to the European Union. And they have given the ultimatum that they either shut down their CBI programs or they risk losing visa-free access. In the United States, the legislation that they are proposing will also seek collaboration with the European countries to shut the program down. But they've gone a step further in the US. They're saying that they will not allow taxpayers' money to be used for any type of due diligence process. So even if the countries in the region wanted to continue their program, say with US clients, they're going to face a real serious issue of getting the due diligence done. So I think we really, and as Mr. Sylvester indicated, now is the time I believe that Caribbean countries have to start to think of alternatives. In the case of Dominica, 55% of our revenues, of government revenues last year, came from the CBI program. That's a major shock to the economy if that has to be reduced. I understand in Antigua it's about 10 to 15%, in Grenada probably about 20%, but that is a significant amount of revenues that these countries have to, within a very short space of time, find an alternative for. And the question is, how do you pivot your economy? How do you, reorient your economy to absorb that shock? And it's going to be a huge challenge. And that raises another very important question, an issue that even the crisis we were talking about earlier has got another whole question of food security. Even how do you guarantee within the Caribbean islands that they have a certain level of food security? How do you guarantee that if this major source of revenues suddenly disappears within the next 2 to 3 years, how do you then maintain a certain standard of living? How do you maintain certain income levels within the country? So I believe that now is the time and is the opportunity. And what I've been hearing, I must say, from a lot of Caribbean leaders is the hope that they can reason their way out of this, that they can somehow avoid what is coming. I think the more realistic approach in my mind is to begin to think critically on how we can address those issues. How can you address this major hit that will obviously be the countries have to take? How do you mitigate? How do you address it, along with all of the problems of climate change and all the other issues that you have faced?
You were just getting into the meld of the matter, and I'm thinking CBI has to be a program all by itself. It's something that people need to understand. I would like to learn a little bit more. Daisy, quickly, has the trade union groupings that you belong to been looking at this issue? Do you have any position on the CBI programs, the citizenship programs?
Let me speak for myself here as well as, yes, we've had discussions on those things, sort of, more informal discussions. And on the one hand, Odette, we know that countries around the world do practice citizenship programs. As Grenadians, we have people in Canada, the UK, America, all across the world who would have earned citizenship in those countries, although they were not born there. So how do we as a Grenadian say no to a CBI program where other persons from other countries can, through a pathway, earn Grenadian citizenship? But when you see a CBI program that says it's going to transform, it's transformational, that's what it's for, but you're wondering what are the sectors of the economy that have been really meaningfully transformed? How many lives in the rural economies, for instance, persons who are in the agricultural sector, who have been really impacted positively by the CBI program? We kind of wonder, is that really happening? You see that there are people, there are agencies, there are law firms, there are people earning high incomes from participating in the CBI program. But how it trickled down in real time to the real Grenadian man and woman on the ground, that seems to be a question in the mind of a lot of Grenadian people, and certainly for the trade union movement. And if it's going to negatively affect Grenada, negatively affect our travel, as happened with the Canadian visa when Canada imposed visa on Grenada many years ago. It was as a direct result of the CBI program, where there were so many persons traveling into Canada who couldn't even speak one word of English, coming from a Grenadian country. Or that I take responsibility for this statement, not GBN. And so you had that sort of a thing happen where Canada said, no, let's look at what's happening in Grenada. And subsequently, visas were imposed. When that happened, a parliamentarian sat in our parliament and said to us, it's a good thing. But prior to that, Grenadians were going to Canada visa-free, and we were welcome there. And so the question is, how is the CBI program really benefiting the real average Grenadian man and woman, improving their livelihoods and their lifestyles? And certainly what we're seeing, as Dr. Fontaine just outlined, is that perhaps these programs may come to an end as it's being practiced now, and what will fill the void in our economy.
That's a tough question. We try not to leave beyond the headlines with questions. We try to get answers, but I guess sometimes there are more questions than answers.
There's another program.
That's another program all by itself. We have a call on the line. We did promise to try and squeeze in a couple callers. Caller, good evening, and thanks for calling.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Relative to that increased cost of living that we end up having, I think to quite an extent, some of it was caused simply by the pandemic, with the scarcity of goods in area of production.
Caller, if you could see me on the TV, I need to stop you. And it's something we say every week, every day. You need to switch off whatever your monitor is. If it's your television or your radio, because we're getting a feedback on this end. We won't be able to continue the call.
Sorry about that. But I'm moving very far away because I have no control over it, in that sense of the word. Sorry about that. But are you hearing me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. To an extent, I think it was caused, the rising cost of goods and the production was caused by the scarcity during the COVID time. And now that you have a resumption of what you might call a whole lot of normalcy in the process, I think a lot of it has been taken advantage by companies and those who monopolize the whole economic situation. And in a given circumstance and situation, I think government should need to sit down with the business people, the importers and the retailers, and discuss the issue to the extent that the government could relieve a whole lot of taxes, especially in our particular situation, where I know our government is very greedy for taxation, for the accumulation of more into the treasury coffers. So that if you sit down and discuss the issue with the businessmen and help them to understand and let the businessmen declare the plight or the actual situation. Because that in itself, given high cost of living nowadays and the scarcity of money, given that a lot of people have lost their job, a lot of business would have their goods and they would not get it sold as they should. So then you have a double whammy, as you might call it.
Right. Caller, I think we got the drift. Thank you so much, Caller. I think we got the drift there because already we've run over time. But thank you so much for that that contribution there. We're out of time. We could go on for another hour on this, but unfortunately we have to start to wind the clock down. And so we're getting into the wrap-up mode. I'm going to ask for closing comments, and I'm going to ask Ambassador Hurst to summarize his thoughts on the wide-ranging issues that we've covered this evening. Ambassador Hurst?
Well, our small countries in the Caribbean have grown accustomed to facing challenges and overcoming them. We spent almost 3 centuries as indentured servants and slaves. We spent an additional century as colonial, being colonized. And we have become independent. And some of us are 40 and 50 years independent. And along each step of the way, we faced many, many challenges which we had to struggle to overcome. This war in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia, the Russian Federation, that war will end. And our struggles will continue. They will be of another nature, but they will continue. What we fear most of all, I must tell you, and we touched on it a little bit tonight, is global climate change. Because if the waters of the Atlantic Ocean bring us seaweeds in large quantities and hurricanes every year, our countries stand in danger of becoming uninhabitable. Now, we might think that that is far-fetched, but there are some little countries in the Pacific that are merely atolls, a few feet above seawater, and we've seen some of them disappear under the ocean, the warming ocean. And that is our main challenge, and that challenge we may not be able to overcome unless we can change some of the systems on which the large countries rely in order to produce energy and other forms of electricity, as well as the most important part of human existence, which is our ability to transport ourselves. Until such time as we're able to overcome this particular challenge, I'm afraid that the future does not look bright for generations of West Indians. But our countries have overcome many, many, many difficulties. And we think that the ones that we now face can be overcome and will be overcome.
Challenges that can be overcome and will be overcome. And you took me back to 1994, Ambassador Hurst, when I first met you and interviewed you as a very green and young journalist in Barbados at the SIDS conference. I'm certain you don't remember this little green journalist stand up in front of you asking you for Antigua and Barbuda's position, but you just jolted my memory that was my very first interaction with you. We want to thank you so much. And as we wrap it up this evening, I'm putting an honorable in front of his name. I'm always so impressed with the clarity which he presents his thoughts. The Permanent Secretary in Grenada's Finance Ministry, Mr. Mike Sylvester, as we wade these waters. Your closing thoughts on tonight's discussion?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Odette. I don't know about the honorable, but let me say that, as always, I'm happy to share information in terms of what's happening and how we can navigate this difficult period. As Ambassador Hurst, so eloquently put it, we are going to face challenges after this war that is going on, and I think when I spoke earlier, I spoke about the whole issue of building resilience. While we navigate the current crisis, we have to always think well ahead and see how we can navigate whatever comes our way. And to be able to do this, we have to build resilience. And so while we navigate this current pandemic, you have to pandemic and if you want to call it shock of high and rising food and fuel prices. We have to see how best we can protect the poor and vulnerable. So there are persons who would be affected more than others, and so they would need additional support. The government has I would say, a moral responsibility to sustain support to these people and to the economy in particular, especially during this period. And that is something that you want to be able to do when you have a crisis. You want to be able to sustain support and support whatever recovery that we have. If you are challenged fiscally and otherwise, and then of course that makes it a lot more difficult. And so the issue of yes, we need to cut taxes or we need to do this, but you also need to collect taxes to be able to do a lot of things that we are talking about. And so in that context, I think the discussion today was very healthy. Again, most of the countries, as you can see, are facing similar challenges. And so we have to look forward in terms of how we deal with the food prices that we are facing, how we ensure that person don't get, in terms of hunger and so on, you don't increase that. You're able to not stifle economic growth by perhaps not addressing the whole issue of the fuel prices and so on. So I'll stop here because I know you're over time. So back to you.
But they say time flies when you're having fun. We weren't having fun, but we were having such a deep discussion that we had no choice but to go over time this evening. Daisy Hazzard, our social activist, trade unionist, and mother, mom tonight.
Yes.
You're wrapping it up saying what?
Well, I want to just end where I started by saying, yes, the war is in Ukraine, it's over there, but we all know that it affects us directly here. Martin Chance, a famous Guyanese poet, said, you are involved. You are involved, you are all consumed. So I want to say tonight, we are involved, we are all consumed. All of us, it takes a whole of society, a governmental approach, it takes an approach from individual homeowners. How do you plan for the psychosocial health of your family? Because as we noted earlier, we've just come through, we're still going through a pandemic, and so there has been an emotional and mental toll. And here we are, every time we put our television sets on, we are confronted with a war. So I would want to say that we have to manage how much of that war we allow to come into our homes, because watching the television, say 24/7, it's not going to change what Mr. Putin decides to do. It's all up to him kinda and international relations. But what we can manage within our own households is how we take care of our mental health, how we take care of our emotional health, how we safeguard our children, and how we plan for the tough days that are likely ahead. Desperate times call for desperate measures, and I'm certain that if we dig deep within ourselves, we will find that Grenadian resilience that says, let me come up with unique and innovative ways to cope and to manage.
Admirable. We'll find out with to come up with Grenadian resilience.
Yes.
Poignant words. And the final word goes to somebody who I must salute and say a special thank you to, Dr. Thompson Fontaine. He is the Deputy Chief Strategist with the South Sudan government, and all of our panelists equally important, but the reason I'm singling him out is because the time he had to do this, 2 o'clock in the morning, South Sudan time, is going on to 3:46, and we know we deprived him of sleep, and we're so grateful to you. And so we give you the closing words this evening, Dr. Thompson. Dr. Fontaine.
And I'm thankful for I thank you very much for the opportunity and to share the space as well with the other panelists. What I can say in closing, though, is that the longer the crisis continues in the Ukraine, is the more pronounced the social and political impacts of this. What we can probably look forward to in the Caribbean is possibly social unrest. There is a very good likelihood that as inflation continues to increase, there may be demands on governments to increase wages. But importantly, I think we need to begin a conversation in the Caribbean about how we wean ourselves away from this heavy dependence on imported petrol. It's time we start to look very seriously at renewable energy sources that can help us at least mitigate better against this. And finally, just in terms of our food security, which I talked about earlier, I think we're extremely vulnerable, because I think it was Daisy who commented earlier that every single thing that comes into Grenada comes on a boat. Now, if this conflict, God forbid, were to expand and then for some weeks or months, if these ships can come in, then you have a serious problem on your hands. So being able to really look seriously at having this diversion, having this focus on food security. I know CARICOM recently committed $100 million, but I believe that each Caribbean government should be placing a greater emphasis on agriculture and on really adding value to agriculture as a way of ensuring that we at least caution some of those very serious and devastating impacts that we get when we have a crisis as we're having now in the Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well spoken by all of our panelists this evening, and that's where we put a wrap on tonight's program, saying thanks again to Mr. Mike Sylvester, the Permanent Secretary in Grenada's Ministry of Finance, and we know that Mike has also had a placement at the IMF in Washington for 3.5 years. Ambassador Lionel Hurst, Antigua and Barbuda's former ambassador to the United Nations, the OAS and United States, now serving as the Chief of Staff in the Prime Minister's Ministry, Antigua, Barbuda. Dr. Thompson Fontaine, he is presently the Deputy Chief Strategist with the South Sudan government, and he's also a former IMF economist. And in studio, trade unionist, social activist, and the woman wearing the head of the household hat. She talks about the single parent families, women heading these households, and she speaks from experience. Daisy, we want to thank you so much. We know it was a last-minute agreement, and we thank you for so elegantly, as always, and eloquently speaking to the issues. So on behalf of the entire production team here at the GBN, I'm Odette Campbell saying so long for now. Always our pleasure to cut and dissect, cut through the noise, and to help us understand, break down these issues. And tonight, I must say again, I've learned so much. Thanks to our panelists and to the production crew here at the GBN. We'll see you again next week with another interesting program.